From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South.
Well, hi, listeners and viewers. Welcome back to our podcast, Take on the South, the podcast of the University of South Carolina's Institute for Southern Studies. I'm one of the hosts, Emily Allen, and I'm excited to share with you one of my conversations about history and culture of the South. So our guest for this episode is Dr. Sarah Waheed. She is an assistant professor of history at USC, where we are currently. Her scholarly expertise is on the history of South Asian Islam and the shaping of Muslim communities across the India-Pakistan divide, and her academic work focuses on gender and memory as well as trans-regional global histories. Her first book, Hidden Histories of Pakistan, Censorship, Literature, and Secular Nationalism in Late Colonial India, was published with Cambridge University Press in 2022. And then she's currently completing her second book about a 16th century Muslim warrior queen of Deccan, a southern region of India. Dr. Sarah Waheed is also one of the lead directors of the Muslim South, which we'll be discussing today, which is a USC Humanities collaborative sponsored research and creative group. The Muslim South is an initiative that highlights the deep roots of Islam in the U.S. South, while also documenting the past and presence of growing Muslim immigrant communities in the region by recording oral histories as well as organizing events in South Carolina and abroad. So welcome, Dr. Waheed, to Take on the South.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me, Emily. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about your work here at the community with the Muslim South group. So to kind of give our listeners and viewers some context, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to be involved in the group?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually was born in Canada and raised in Saudi Arabia with heritage from South Asia. And I've traveled extensively in both India and Pakistan, as well as the Middle East. And I'm a historian. And as Emily was saying, my work is focused specifically on the Muslim pasts of South Asia. I actually happen to be originally from Hyderabad, which is a city located in southern India. And so that region that it belongs to is known as the Deccan, the southern part of India. And it was once the largest and wealthiest princely state in all of South Asia and was this multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan Muslim dynasty with a pluralist and cosmopolitan ethos made up of not only diverse groupings of Muslims, but also Hindus and many other religious communities. And so Hyderabad was connected to the Indian Ocean world for many centuries, notably the Middle East and North Africa. And these are regions which are now known as the Global South. So I've also lived in the United States in many different places, such as Chicago, Boston, and DC. And I lived in North Carolina for about 7 years before moving to South Carolina almost 3 years ago. So you can say that from the southern region of India through to the Global South and now to the southern United States, the South really matters to me in all its different forms. And specifically, when we think about something like this initiative, the Muslim South, it is actually a humanities collaborative initiative, research and creative group at USC. And it came about because some faculty and I had thought about how to bring the humanities into broader contexts beyond the university. So connecting communities with academia and sort of looking at the humanities in everyday life, in music, art, literature, storytelling, culture, and especially for me in history, sort of history in action. And the purpose of the Muslim South is to, well, first of all, build really a vast oral history and archival repository on Muslims in the U.S. South for students and faculty, for staff, for anyone who really wants to research this topic. And also to cultivate spaces of learning about Islam and Muslims in the U.S. South. And while there has been growing research on American Islam and American Muslims, these have tended to focus largely on the Northeast or populations in the Midwest, like in Chicago. But there's over 1 million Muslims here in the U.S. South, at least, and their stories have yet to be told.
Yeah, I love the approach that you're taking there in terms of these different layers of region and place and peoples, like the global South, the US South, kind of painting this picture for us through these peoples and this oral histories and stuff. So that's actually what I wanted to ask you about in terms of your group's work is with those oral history efforts. How is that going? Like what's that about at the moment?
Yeah, before I get to the oral histories, I wanted to say a little bit about sort of the history of Islam in the South, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
For sure.
it has really, really old roots in the U.S. South, especially, notably sort of with regards to formerly enslaved African American populations. And if you look at someone, for example, who's gotten a more attention in recent years, is a highly educated Senegalese man named Omar bin Said. And his autobiography is the only known Arabic language autobiography written by an enslaved person in the U.S. And he first actually arrived into Charleston. That is where he was first brought, and then he actually escaped South Carolina and ended up in North Carolina, where he was re-enslaved. But even more interesting to me, with regards to these really old roots, there's been this recent research. Mohammed Fraser Rahim has recently published a book about Islam amongst the Gullah Geechee peoples, and he's highlighting the continuity of Islamic belief and practice in the Low Country from as early as the 17th century into the present. So this idea that Muslims are new to the U.S. South is something that we really have to challenge given this much older history. And I think some of the research more recently, although the numbers aren't very clear, when we talk about enslaved populations of African peoples, there were I think it's Sylviana Daouf who writes about this, and she talked about something like almost a quarter, possibly a quarter, were Muslims. Now, of course, like, again, from diverse parts of Africa and so on and so forth. More recently, in the 20th century, if we look at the rise of immigrant communities, Muslim immigrant communities all across the South. I mean, South Carolina, again, is really fascinating. The very first, so there's a sect of Islam, Ismailis. In fact, their spiritual leader, Aga Khan, recently passed away. That's sort of been in the news. And the very first Ismaili Jamaat Khana was actually established here in South Carolina, in Spartanburg, in the 1970s. And that was sort of during, but that was set up by East African Indian Muslim refugees. And if we look at Colombia specifically, the oldest mosque was established by the Nation of Islam, and that was in the 1950s. And then, of course, we know, as I mentioned, communities of African American Muslims constitute this really vital component and vital dimension of overall Muslim life in the South. But like in the past 4 to 5 decades, there have been increasing numbers of Muslim immigrant communities, and I'm talking about India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, but also refugees from places like Myanmar, and of course here in the South, Afghan refugees. There's also many communities, sort of from the Middle East and Central Asia, and they contribute in so many economic, social, and cultural ways to the U.S. more broadly, but especially, as we know, to the U.S. South. So, I mean, that's something that we've been trying to connect, again, academia to the broader community. So Professor Noah Gardner, who's a professor here of Islamic Studies, is part of this initiative. But we also have a community liaison whose name is Ome Salma Rahmatullah, who's actually from this Ismaili community. And we had a huge event that featured foodways in the South, where she featured sort of this East African foodways through connections in her own family. And she brought food from Atlanta. It was amazing. And she's just been this really vital component to the Muslim South Project. She's a really phenomenal community builder and organizer. And she's been working here with Muslim communities in the South for almost a decade. She's been living here in Colombia. So we've been working together with a lot of the other Muslim communities here, or, from mosques to commercial centers and other sort of spaces where people gather to sort of set up events, but also, like I mentioned, the oral history is a big part of it.
Yeah, I'm curious. another layer of outreach, putting on my musicology hat for a second. I was curious how much the opera Omar, I was curious how
Yes.
much that addresses some of these things that you're talking about. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but
Yes,
it'd be
I have
interesting.
not yet watched it. Unfortunately, I want that's my next step. I have a student who's actually really interested in doing an MA project on
cool.
this sort of communities of African American Muslims, the earliest communities here. And this is because he's learned. His name is Aiden Riley, and he's one of the students involved in this
Sweet.
initiative. Yeah, and because he knows Arabic and he's been studying Arabic, he'll be actually able to read those primary source documents.
It's amazing.
So yeah, there's a lot of work yet to be done. I mean, he's the most well known, I would say, but there still hasn't been that much research even on him. I mean, it's only just really beginning, and we have, of course, many others sort of here in the South, especially sort of thinking about the Gullah Geechee communities too.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really taking as much of a holistic approach as you can
Yes.
between primary sources and then like you're getting at the oral history side of it
Yes.
as well, which is really awesome to hear. Yeah, and I was thinking about also the events that y'all have been putting on. I wanted to go to that food waste one. I was so disappointed I wasn't able to go. But I know you have some other events coming up. I know you mentioned, or I've seen on social media, that there's the Ramadan night market coming up on March 6th. So what do you think people can expect from that event, or maybe some other events that y'all have coming up?
So this is very exciting. This is actually Colombia's very first Ramadan night market. And it's a collaboration between the Humanities Collaborative, the Muslim South, and the CMA, Columbia Museum of Art, as well as the Greater Columbia Muslim Association. And it's going to be right there in Boyd Plaza. And I think, this is an opportunity for people to learn about people in their community, their neighbors, their coworkers, people who live here, Muslims. I mean, so both sort of Muslims here, and to learn about sort of the diversity of Muslim population. I mean, something like 25% of Muslims, 25% of the global population is made up of Muslims, and Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar. It's observed by Muslims all over the world as a month of fasting, of prayer, of reflection, and community, and it really commemorates the month that the Prophet, Muhammad received his first revelation. So Muslims fast from dawn to dusk. And in Muslim countries, after breaking their fast, which is known as iftar, they spend their time in spiritual devotion. And so, but there's also these night markets that come to life in a lot of Muslim majority countries because, of course, the schedule flips, as it were, right? People are eating at night instead of during the day. And those markets provide a boost to local economies. And I mean, I had the privilege of course, growing up in, Muslim societies and countries, and spaces. So those night markets really are full of life. People are preparing for, of course, there's the mosque life, but people are also preparing for, the Eid al-Fitr, at the end of the month of Ramadan, it's celebrated. There's a big feast at the end. So people are preparing for that. There's what people can expect at the Ramadan night market is an opportunity, for example, to listen to recitations of the Quran, which is recited all throughout the month, but also to hear some other music. There'll be some music as well. There will be a number of handicraft vendors, a lot of, there'll be food trucks and a lot of opportunity for people to really engage with different cultures all around the Muslim world, from sort of African countries, African American Muslims, as well as, South Asian Muslims, Arabs, Turks. I mean, you name it. So there's sort of there'll be a wide panoply of like different stations. People can learn how to make paper lanterns and get henna done on their hands. That's something that's done in a lot of countries around the world, from North Africa to South Asia. So there's just going to be it'll be a very lively opportunity to learn about Muslims, Islam, and Ramadan, and also experience what that night market looks like in a lot of countries around the world.
I love that because there's always like a push in what we do to have experiential learning opportunities.
Yes.
And, we can talk about all these things that we were talking about before between the primary sources and the oral histories. But I love that you're thinking about bringing that to the greater community to experience these things as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the wonderful things about working at a university is getting to work with students and that experiential learning, both sort of connecting sort of many students here. So I have a PhD student named Maliha Fatima who's been involved in this initiative, doing some of the oral histories. And I also have two undergraduates. I mentioned Aidan Riley, of course, who's a history minor, but there's also the MSA president, Sahifa Sadek, who's been involved in some of these oral history initiatives. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, or more about, the oral history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's something, and I'm really grateful. We met with the director of the South Caroliniana Library, Nathan Saunders.
Awesome.
And we have been getting like a lot of support. And Andrea Lamadou led a number of multiple workshops on how to conduct interviews, oral history interviews, for those of us who are not initiated into that methodology of and approach to history. Because the voices we document now, the voices we document now will stand, will be primary sources many years from now. And also they record people's memories of their, lived experiences. And so we started to record stories. For example, one of our first was the Imam, Omar Shaheed, who's the Imam of Masjid al-Salam, again, the oldest mosque of Colombia. And his interview was just really fascinating. He talked about growing up, right here in South Carolina. And there's just like so much. It's so rich, both sort of his story of conversion to Islam, his experiences with the Nation of Islam, how he moved away from the Nation of Islam. I mean, and just like a very rich history of him traveling abroad to Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's multiple layers of his life story. And so we were able to record that. And we're also working with other communities as well. I know that one of our students is going to be interviewing members of the Rohingya community. They're from Myanmar, and they've settled in places such as Greenville, South Carolina. And, those of you who are not familiar, the Rohingya Muslim peoples have been undergoing a genocide for over 5 years now. They're persecuted both by the military of Myanmar, but also by Buddhist nationalists. And they fled to neighboring countries as a result of this persecution, but they've also immigrated to the U.S. And so I just think all of these stories deserve to be told. I mean, there's just such a diverse. So we have here, what we're trying to do the first year of this project is to have sort of the sort of oldest communities represented, African-American Muslims who kind of have the oldest communities, and the most recent communities represented, sort of, refugees and also more recent immigrant communities that have started to move here to the South. And specifically, we're starting with Columbia, South Carolina, then South Carolina, and then we're going to expand. I mean, Atlanta alone, as you know, just has such a enormous, very, very diverse communities there from all walks of life. So we're hoping to really expand after we kind of get rooted here in South Carolina and then move on.
I love that. And you have such a cool trajectory of possibilities to go with this, I think. And, you're painting this really rich picture of these communities and this place that we call the South, I think, in really important ways. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what y'all keep doing. And I know we've been talking about the upcoming market and the oral histories and sort of the way you've been working with students, but was there anything else about this group that you're working with, the Muslim South, that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, please come to the Ramadan night market.
Yes.
It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be awesome.
And then, I wanted to add that maybe perhaps one thing I would add is that there's been a lot of, negative misconceptions and stereotypes about Islam and Muslims. And that's just been this ongoing problem. And I think that actually learning about Islam and Muslims from Muslims themselves and just really getting to experience the full diversity and the full there's just so many different perspectives. I mean, by class, by race, by nationality, ethnic origin. You can really understand that this is not a monolithic, grouping. I mean, not that any group is, of course, but that, I think it really does challenge a lot of those misconceptions and stereotypes to learn about communities. I mean, it's also very enriching to learn about, for example, music. Right, is something that draws many of us together because, and that's something that we will be having an art. There'll be a calligrapher at the Ramadan night market. So getting to experience people's ways of life through art, literature, storytelling,
Absolutely.
and handicrafts and all kinds of different, and getting to speak to people one-on-one. And also, of course, food. Food and like music, food is a great sort of way in which communities gather together. You breaking bread together and learning about one another and tasting different kinds of foods. And that's also something that people will get to learn about. And I think that that's, and also just sort of understanding the importance in this case of Ramadan, which is coming up, and what that means for Muslims. And, because again, there are just so many different Muslims here in the US South from all different walks of life, right? That having the experience. And so this is, again, like something that connects our academic research, because of course I'm a scholar, but I'm also someone who's really devoted to enhancing or, building community. And
For
I
sure.
think it's just really important to link these two things together and to really see how people's, how we might learn from one another.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's in higher education in general we're working towards is public engagement. And it
Yeah.
sounds like that the group and led by you is really doing that, which is really awesome to see. And I hope that a lot of you go to the night market next
Please
week.
do.
So
Yeah.
it'll be a fun time, I'm sure. I'm definitely looking forward to the music and whatnot. So, but yeah, I thank you so much for talking with us about everything that you're doing. And I hope that all of you have learned more about this group that we have now here at the University of South Carolina. It was a pleasure to meet you and talk with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and listeners, just as a quick recap, this was a conversation with Dr. Sarah Waheed, and I'll see you next time here on Take on the South.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.